I haven't seen anything that's happened in the Holy Land change American politics as much as the Israel-Gaza conflict has changed U.S. politics in the last few years. The Democratic Party was trending in a less Zionist direction, less supportive of Israel, but it seems like that trend has just been absolutely turbocharged. And the Republican Party is still very pro-Israel, but you can see that also shifting in some polling, especially among younger Republicans. And you don't have to look very far on the internet to find right-wing factions that are sort of frankly anti-Zionist with
the Tucker wing of the party.
Right, which is a real, there's been a Pat Buchanan wing of the Republican Party for a long time, but it just seems like the current environment has shifted things on both right and left. Do you agree? Like, do you think the change, how big do you think that change is?
These were trends that you can date back over a decade.
Right.
Even at the beginning of the Second Intifada, at the turn of this century, you started to see the left, at least the hard left in America, take an increasingly anti-Israel turn, and that left has expanded on the wings of the Bernie Sanders campaign and other left-wing populists. So I see it more as an evolution rather than a kind of a sudden shift on account of the last 20 or so months of war. And it's the same thing with the Republican Party. Before there was Tucker, there was Pat Buchanan. Whether the anti-Israel wing of the Democratic Party becomes the dominant wing, I think that's quite possible. I'm more skeptical that it would happen on the Republican side.
I mean, I think on the Republican side, you have a sort of core constituency in evangelical Christians that is supportive of Israel for not just sort of one specific theological reason, but a whole host of reasons going back culturally, arguably to the 18th century. There's sort of a lot of interesting threads in terms of American attitudes towards Israel that long predate the actual refounding of the State of Israel. At the same time, I feel like I'm, fairly well aware of trends among young right-leaning voters. I was around for Pat Buchanan. It feels more substantial than the Buchananite moment. It feels like there's a skepticism of the American relationship to Israel that has taken root on the right in a stronger way than I can remember in my lifetime.
I think, and I'm speculating, that this is simply a function of the Republican turn to a kind of broader skepticism about foreign alliances of any stripe. The same people who I think would tell you that they're opposed to American supplies, military supplies to Ukraine, aren't very happy about our alliance with Israel. The same people who are trade protectionists would also be kind of, not, if not hostile, at least skeptical of our support for the Israelis. By the way, it's a good argument at some point soon for the Israelis simply to wean themselves completely from American military aid. Israel's a $500 billion economy with an incredibly robust domestic military set of military industries. The Israelis do not need to be getting $3 billion of American taxpayer money, even though most of that money goes to Boeing and Lockheed Martin and a few other defense contractors.
Well, so I guess that gets to one of my questions here, right? Which is this a reality that Israeli policymakers should consider as a factor in their own decision-making?
If I were the defense minister or prime minister of Israel, I would set the goal that by, say, 2030, all of the munitions that Israel uses are produced in Israel, or at least mostly produced in Israel, that Israel should be able to defend itself. I mean, the Israelis like to say we want to defend ourselves by ourselves, but the Israelis should have the confidence of knowing that they do not have to rely on the goodwill of any American president, whether it's Laura Trump or Hunter Biden when he becomes president. That's a joke, but you never know.
He's sticking with painting. No, but not Hunter Biden, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, right? Let's say, some figure associated with the current American left.
Well, I do think that when we get out of the Democratic corridor of AOC's district, or maybe the People's Republic of Mamdani in a few months' time, that you'll find most Democrats that I meet take a much more level-headed view of our relationship with Israel. The potential frontrunners for the next Democratic presidential candidate, I don't see any of them coming from the anti-Israel wing of the Democratic Party. What I do see is a Democratic Party that is elevating voices that have many views, among them strident anti-Israeli views, that are going to harm the party's chances in the next electoral cycle.
I mean, I guess it depends on how you define anti-Israel, right? But from what I can see from polling, when it comes specifically at least to the war in Gaza, but also support for bombing of Iran and so on, right? Like, I would say a reflective hostility to Israeli policy is a dominant view in the Democratic coalition right now.
Is that Josh Shapiro's view, Andy Bashir's view, Wes Moore's view? I think what you're seeing is a Democratic Party that has a progressive insurgency within it. But rank-and-file Democrats are very ambivalent about that insurgency and its views on many subjects, of which Israel is one of them. Now, who knows what the future will bring? You know, I was so spectacularly wrong about the direction of the Republican Party, say in 2014, 2015. So I need to be a little mindful of the mistakes that I've made in the past. But I don't see a Democratic Party being effectively taken over by this progressive wing, because it's not progressive at some level. It's hostile to the views of middle-class Americans.
What about the part of this that isn't about Israeli strategy and, sort of U.S. policy towards Israel, but it's about American culture, right? So, again, you and I would both agree there's been a surge in anti-Israel sentiment.
And anti-Semitic
Well,
sentiment.
Right. I assume that you think that anti-Zionism, critiques of Israel's policy shade really easily into anti-Semitism, right?
Yes. I mean, one is the entry drug into the other.
Can you criticize Israel without becoming anti-Semitic?
Of course you can. And, this is one of the points that I tear my hair out. Look, you want to see the most acerbic critic of criticism of Israel? Go to the Haaretz website, a leading Israeli paper. Israelis criticize Israeli politics all the time when it comes to every issue imaginable. There are no sacred cows. There are no red lines. In fact, some of the most strident anti-Zionist voices will often refer to Israelis writing in Haaretz to kind of wash themselves of accusations of anti-Semitism. Let me just make this baseline point because, again, criticism of Israeli policy can be mistaken, but it's always legitimate. But anti-Zionism is not criticism solely of Israeli policy. Anti-Zionism is criticism of the existence of the state of Israel as a state that has the right to exist. So it's a little bit different. I mean, if people hate Donald Trump, by all means, hate Donald Trump, but that doesn't make you anti-American, right? It doesn't make you want to destroy the United States because you can't stand the policies of the Trump administration. Anti-Zionism is the belief that a Jewish state does not have a right to exist. Now, I would accept that argument isn't anti-Semitic if people said a Japanese state doesn't have the right to exist or a Icelandic state doesn't have the right to exist.
I mean, in fairness, in our own time, I would say that argument has often come bundled with progressive views that generally ethno-states are illegitimate. I do think that there's
I've yet to see a protest outside of the Icelandic mission to the UN saying down with Iceland, an ethnically homogenous state, or down with Japan, which tends to treat minorities in a discriminatory way, or down with Denmark because the Danish Lutheran Church enjoys certain tax advantages against other faiths in Denmark.
I would say that
uniquely aimed at one ethno-state that happens to be the Jewish state. And if you are a Jew whose life story is about a mother in hiding in the Holocaust and a grandfather who fled the pogrom in Kishinev, you have the right to cock a skeptical eyebrow and say, why us?
So one, I agree. I think that there is what you might call just a persistent excess in the way the case against Israel is prosecuted, especially on the left, sometimes on the right, that is hard to explain without talking about anti-Semitism as this kind of constant temptation. If you watch internet culture, right, sort of play itself out, it is kind of fascinating in a morbid way that the pull of, you've gone through 4 levels of disillusionment, and the 5th level of disillusionment, you're going to blame the Jews, right? There is some sort of eternal recurrence of that tendency. All I'm saying is that there is also a tendency where arguments about Israel and Palestine are connected to arguments about American history and American identity. I agree, nobody's protesting the existence of Iceland, but plenty of people are invested in the idea that, France or the UK or Europe broadly should become a kind of multi-ethnic, multi-religious society. And they, again, I'm describing people on the left, they see their view of, some kind of binational future for Israel as part of that. I think there is a continuum here that runs from anti-Semitism in excess through sort of other arguments in left-wing politics.
That's fair and true.
Which is why,
I
worry, right, in an age when the left is a very important part of Western culture and American culture, right, about the darker pull, right, the extent to which there is this sort of inherent pull towards overt or tacit anti-Semitism in these debates. And I just feel like that pull has just clearly gotten stronger because of the Gaza war.
No, it happened before the Gaza war. And the best evidence of this was that the protests, the accusations that Israel is committing genocide happened on October 8th. And the Israelis had were still clearing out Hamas from their own territory. It's not as if suddenly this terrible Gaza war happened and the left said, oh, geez, these people are terrible. Look at what they're doing. All of the feelings, the entire architecture of opprobrium and hatred was in place on October 6th so that these people would celebrate on October 8th. And one of the most shocking experiences to me as a Jew was going on the 8th of October to a protest that had been hastily arranged in which people were, the expression on people's faces in the wake of this unbelievable massacre was euphoria. So when people say, well, this is the result of the war in Gaza, I'm sorry, but that doesn't explain the letter from however many Harvard organizations that putting the blame entirely on the Israelis. It doesn't explain the protests in Sydney calling on them to F the Jews. This hatred was there. And, it is true that people are against ethno-states, sort of in theory. But you have to ask, why is Israel the object of an obsessive hatred? And it's not because it's American taxpayers, because you're seeing the same kind of protests and the same kind of hatred in Melbourne and Sydney and any number of other places I've visited that contribute nothing to Israel's defense.